All right, great. Hello, everyone. My name is Seema Marshall, and I am your host slash MC for the Elevate Role Model Speaker Series. I always trip over that word. I need to enunciate a little better. But today we have Reverend Rod Williams, who is our Elevate Role Model Speaker for today. He is the co-founder and managing principal of Best Talent Management Solutions, a firm specializing in career management and transition executive coaching, marketing research, and branding. Mr. Williams designs and delivers impactful programming for a wide range of organizations, including Fortune 500 companies, small to mid-sized businesses, and nonprofit entities. So today we have Mr. Rod Williams. Hello.
Thank you so much, Serena. I'm actually happy to be here, just excited to have the opportunity to speak to these young, impressionable minds, and hopefully that I can impart some wisdom.
Yes, thank you. And just keep in mind to all the interns and anybody else in the chat to please have any questions. You can have them in the chat. You can raise your hand and I will gladly call on you to ask Mr. Williams any further questions that I don't get to reach. So first and foremost, my first question is to kind of explain your two most current endeavors or projects that you're working on in your career right now, just to give everyone a broad scope of what you're doing right now in your career.
Okay, thank you. And so I thought about that question, and I thought it's a really insightful one because I'm going to give you a couple of answers that focus on both the professional and my what we would call more of the give back side of it. Because on the one side, I'm currently working with a young lady who is a recent college graduate on her career transition. She was an international studies major in finance, and so she's looking to get an opportunity to work with the think tank or governmental agencies, not so much the government with the current environment that's going there, but she certainly is interested in pursuing. She's speaks in 5 languages and has a great appetite for policies and procedures. And so I'm working with her to utilize networks of our contacts and people that we've run across. That's our strength as a company, is utilizing the value of our networking contacts to help people to navigate their careers. And that includes, as you said earlier, the parts that involve branding, that involve promotion, that involve marketing. It's all really part of the same process because when you enter into the workplace, it's about understanding how to sell your brand, which are your skills and qualifications. And so the flip side of that is that I'm also on the volunteer side managing a political campaign for a real good friend who's running for the Board of Education out in Hunterdon County. And so it's a reminder that whatever you do on the professional side, you should always find a way to incorporate your passions that you enjoy doing or that you enjoy that help other people along the way. And you'll never find anything more rewarding than being able to use what you know professionally to also make a difference in the world.
Wow, that's a just great answer just straight out of the gate. And I think it's kind of important to understand exactly what you're saying and the dual responsibility of not only being a career professional, but also giving back to your community. So that was a fantastic answer to start off with. And my second question is kind of going a little bit backwards in time, talking about your time at college. And in our meeting, in our prep meeting earlier, we talked about how you went to two colleges, Tennessee State and Georgia Tech. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Right. And so I wanted to kind of ask the question about how was that transition between the two institutions and what gave you the courage to change schools at that particular time in your life?
And so going back through the memory banks to think about that time, yeah, I started out at Tennessee State because one of the things I wanted to do, I came up in a small town in South Carolina. And so I came up during the time when schools were being integrated. And so I was having an opportunity to go to an HBCU for my higher learning, if you will. And so Tennessee State was the school that offered me the opportunity to have a blended scholarship. You know, I had several athletic scholarships offered. I had some academic scholarships. And so Tennessee State decided that they would allow me to have both, that they would make part of my scholarship academic and part athletic. And so I really appreciated that for them. And so I went there to play basketball and pursue engineering. That was my initial interest. Unfortunately, after I got there, they started having some issues in the state of Tennessee about two different state-supported institutions in the same city. There's Tennessee State is in Nashville, and also University of Tennessee Nashville is there, and so they couldn't have two state-funded, so they had to merge them. And so I saw that, well, this wasn't going to be the experience that I was looking for. Fortunately, at the time, Georgia Tech had a quarterback who was interested in going to Tennessee State. And so, in order to sort of balance the books, they needed
Mhm.
someone who'd be willing to go to Georgia Tech. And so I spoke with the coaching staff there, and it made sense that we would do a sort of a swap. And so it was a combination of looking at the landscape of what was going on from my initial choice, but then also deciding that Georgia Tech being a Division I school at a higher level would help me to pursue that side because, at that time I still had visions of being in the National Basketball Association.
Mhm.
So that seemed to be a good choice to make to go to Atlanta. And at the same time, Atlanta was a hub of HBCUs. So I felt like I could probably still get some of that experience while matriculating and also pursuing my passion.
Right. And in that same vein of kind of athleticism, I wanted to ask, did like your discipline as an athlete carry over in both your academics and then your overall character? And that would obviously be very helpful in your career path.
My mother insisted so,
Right.
and and I say that not facetiously
Mhm.
because one of the things I found out when I was in grade school was I got really focused on basketball, so focused that I forgot to do a book report. And
Mhm.
my mother found out about that, and suddenly my basketball career was in jeopardy because it was literally over until I got all of my grades straightened out. And a funny thing occurred along the way is that because of the emphasis that she put on the academics, I got to a place where I could not flourish in one if the other wasn't working as well. So it
Mhm.
really got to the point where if I was struggling academically, I was struggling also on the basketball court and vice versa. And
Mhm.
so I've really had this sense of both of them needing to be in tandem. And so I utilize a lot of the same disciplines of opening up my sort of thought process to understanding what it meant to practice hard, to study the opponents, to study my books that were, I looked at my books the same way, something that I needed to conquer and that I needed to master because I wanted to be the absolute best student that I could be at the same time as being the best athlete. Because I'll tell you one thing, coming from an underrepresented community, there are some stigmas that are attached. And so I was also very resistant to the notion that I was going to be labeled as, a jock per se. And so that was a part of the fuel that, as I mentioned earlier, reason why Tennessee State appealed to me more so than the other schools is because they allowed me to have the best of both worlds. The scholarship could be both academic and athletic. But yeah, at the same time, I had to be able to do both in order to feel like I was going to succeed.
Right. And you said that you pursued engineering at Tennessee State. And then you all had also mentioned that you pursued a major in biology at Georgia Tech. And so I just wanted to know how your experience at the two schools and the majors that you chose led you into your various career paths, because I would also like an explanation of what you did before Best Management Solutions.
Yeah, and that I'm glad you raised that question because it does kind of seem if anyone was looking at the chronology and they said, well, wait a minute, you were at Tennessee State and HBCU and you went to Georgia Tech. You were in engineering at Tennessee State, Georgia Tech, which is known for engineering. You went there and you moved to biology. And
Mhm.
so the interesting thing that I did uncover at Tennessee State was that I didn't want to be an engineer. Is that I spoke to some engineers who shared with me a part of their life, if you will, which said that, in particular, I spoke to an engineer who was working for Exxon at the time. And he talked to me about the fact that in his mind, his world, that there were two types of engineers. He said there are those who drink the coffee and those who bring it to them. And I wanted to understand a little bit more about that. And so basically he broke it down to say like there are those who do the conceptualizing of solutions for problems, which is what I was really drawn to. And then there are those who were responsibility is to sort of carry out the plans and projects that were assigned to them. And so I said, well, I'm not didn't know how long that took. I asked him, how long have you been at this? And he said, well, It's only been 10 years and I'm still bringing the coffee. And I thought like, okay, so that's not really going to work for me. So I looked at Georgia Tech to find a major. And one of the other things I'd always been interested in was potentially going the medical field route. And so I thought, well, if I'm going to go to a school like Georgia Tech, which is a science and technology school, I can really focus on science. And because I never was as excited about the literature courses and the humanities and so forth. And so Georgia Tech offered a unique opportunity to kind of cut to the chase. So I started to pursue that part of the process. And then, as I said, as I matriculated at Georgia Tech and got to my senior year and actually applied to medical school and got accepted. And then I talked to some more doctors who explained to me that as a doctor, your schooling never stops.
Yeah.
And I thought to myself, well, that's not appealing to me either. I wasn't the kind of
Mm,
person who felt like, I've got a sister who's actually a physician, and she's 2 years younger than me, and and she's constantly, she loves it, but so she's constantly pursuing the next updates. And as you, all of us know, we want our doctors to be on top of every new development, every new pharmaceutical, every new procedure. And so, but that I also understood wasn't me. And
right.
so that was the point at which I took this career turn because I also was working as an intern for Coca-Cola during my junior and senior years. And so when I was graduating, I got the opportunity to take a full-time position there. And so I certainly loved, that's one of my passions about this program of
Mhm.
how to help young people to learn how to turn internships into full-time opportunities. And so it worked for me that I went to work for Coca-Cola in their marketing research group, which again was a lot of science, a lot of math, a lot of statistics. And so that path carried me through Coca-Cola to get to Frito-Lay, to get to IBM, to get to finally AT&T and T and come to New Jersey. And so I've had that sort of winding career path that brought me ultimately to New Jersey years ago. And ultimately from that, like I said, so it's been a path of two careers. One that was highly involved in marketing research before transitioning into this human resources related field of career management.
Mhm. And can I ask more about your internship time at Coca-Cola? Like, how was that interview process? And then how did you try to stand out as an intern?
Yeah, and so again, a great question. And so it's interesting as you let me think about some of these things. It reminds me of how everything, the old saying that everything that's old is new again. Because even back then, before I got into this world of teaching networking and helping people to really understand the value and power of it, the way I got into Coca-Cola was through networking. In other words, one of my classmates' father worked there, and so his father, interestingly enough, was head of the Coca-Cola motor pool. They had those back in those days that, where in essence there were people who he was from the military and he had gotten a job because his friend was actually the now president of Coca-Cola. And so that networking thing worked for them and that he got the opportunity to oversee their motor pool, which meant their vehicles and seeing that through. And so one day, his son, who was one of my friends, we said he said to us, "Do you want to go up and see the president's office?" And
Mhm.
so we're two little young early, I guess we were still teens then. And so it's
Mhm.
like, well, absolutely. So, so we get to go up to this penthouse office and, we're just absolutely amazed. And, but I never would have thought if I had not been in this circle that the head of the motor pool would be able to take you to the very top of the organization known as Coca-Cola, which is this multi-billion-dollar organization. And
Right.
so I learned about the power of connections and networks early. And so yeah, so it's one of those things that by once you start in that process and then the job itself, because of the connections that I made and the people that I learned to make a favorable impression with, as I said, after working in that internship, once the opportunity came to actually have to look for a job, they shortened that cycle for me and that
Right.
they said like, why don't you just come to work here? And it said I never looked back. I took that opportunity and ran with it, and it has been very fruitful.
Right. And how do you think that early kind of networking opportunity set you up to either give advice to the people that you're currently working with?
Well, and as I shared, thank you for following that up because it's the same literal process that, we teach in our business. We say, everybody's heard the old adage, it's not what you know, it's who you know. Well, we take it a step further and say it's who knows you.
Right.
Because in essence, just because you know someone doesn't necessarily mean that they know you, if you follow. I think everybody understands that part
Mm,
of the conversation. And so it means that you understand that you need to make an impression, a favorable impression. What's the old saying? You only get one chance to make an impression. And
mm,
so you want to make that first impression rather. And so once you do that, you want to make sure that it is a memorable one. It's one that is positive and that when people are introduced, they have the opportunity to reflect on that and say, well, this is how I felt when I met this person. They maybe feel good about the experience. And so we help young people. I was at an event just last night at Union County College. They have a group called Close the Gap, and it deals specifically with helping young African Americans to matriculate and do better in at Union County College, and they are now in the top 10 county colleges in the nation, and this program is a big part of that. And so I took a little cousin who is just graduated from high school and he's a little directionless at this point, trying to figure it out. So I thought this would be a good opportunity for him to get there and meet some of the movers and shakers because he said he lives in Union, as a matter of fact. And so he said, well, Union County College is one of the places he's kind of considering. So we went there, and so I had him take advantage of opportunities. I was introducing him to members of the board, to the college president, to some of the donors. There were a couple of politicians there, one who's running for the U.S. Congress, another who's running for state representative. And so, there were just a lot of people there. And so he got an opportunity to meet these folks who really reached out to him and said to him, like, hey, the person who gave the keynote speech was actually a Union County freshman who had just completed his first year. And so they were all encouraging him, saying, you know what, you can be this speaker next year. And so it really kind of lit a fire under him to now think about what he can do on the college front and understanding the true value and power of networking.
right, definitely. And I think another layer to networking is options. You realize how many options that you have, whether in your career field and the type of person that you want to be, because you're meeting all these various different people. So that's a great opportunity. I guess my next question is what is your mindset about goal keeping? Are you someone who sets goals for yourself to create clear steps to achieve them, or do you allow yourself room for change?
I think you have to do both. I think you have to, it's kind of like we talk to our clients often about what we call setting a business plan for your career. And so when we talk about that, we emphasize the fact that every company has a business plan. And the strength of a business plan is going through the exercise of creating the business plan. You know, Companies, once that business plan is created, they don't take that thing out every day and have it on their desk and say, okay, what are we supposed to do today? But because they've gone through the exercise of figuring out where they want to be in 5 years, in 10 years, and how they want to get there, now they are prepared for decisions that will help them to process along that pathway. Now, what do we know? That it's always good to plan, but as in my other vocation as a minister, we also say we've got a saying that says, if you want to make God laugh, tell him your plans. And so we understand that things can change in the blink of an eye. So you have to be somewhat flexible. And people who have tended to try to push against the currents are often those who fail. As we say, salmon are the only ones who try to regularly swim against the current and they drown. So, so that's not what we consider as a successful methodology. So it says that, yes, you absolutely want to sit down and plot out your career and your goals in life as to what you want to do and where you want to be. but you also need to recognize that you can't see the future. And so you don't know what's going to happen from all processes, whether the management of your company, whether your family issues, what happens with you health wise. There's so many things that can impact your choices. So you don't want to find yourself so greatly disappointed because you weren't able to execute your plan, but you certainly want to have a plan so that you're not stuck trying to, at each turn, figure out all the variables and what you want to do.
Right. So the ability to kind of pivot with what life is throwing at you, definitely.
Mm.
And I also kind of want to ask about how you began as a founder. Like, who was the team that you put together? How did you set the foundation for a successful business?
Yeah. So when I transitioned out of AT&T, and that was a process where AT&T was going through a lot of radical changes with divestiture. That's a term you may have studied in your classes, some of you, about the idea that AT&T was broken up. AT&T was a monopoly for almost 100 years of having had all of the nation's telecommunication services as its own little fiefdom. And so the decision that was rendered in the 80s basically said that they could no longer do that. They needed to have competition. So they broke up AT&T into these different operating companies. And so as a part of that, there were some really nice packages set up for people to transition out. And so having worked with them for a number of years, and I saw those packages, and I was also, my network had told me that the first packages given are always going to be the best because those are the ones that are meant to incent people to actually leave. And
Right.
so, and I thought to myself, you know what, I've done this enough now. I've transferred across the country. I've gotten here. I think this is enough of being transplanted. And so I took that package, and that package then allowed me to explore what I wanted to do next. And so, as I said, having run facilities for them, I'd managed a number of different startups and marketing facilities, marketing research facilities for them. And so I'd learned a lot also about the human resources or quote unquote talent management side of the equation. And so there was a firm out there called Lee Hecht Harrison that still exists today as either the number one or number two worldwide outplacement firm, career transition firm under the Deco umbrella. And so I went to work for them, and I worked for them for almost 17 years about. And so, but I was working in different facilities again, so working with Lee Hecht Harrison, I was managing operations. I had an office that I managed in Little Rock, Arkansas, in Los Angeles, in Albany, New York, in Portland, Maine, and my main base was in Midtown Manhattan. And so I was commuting every day into Midtown Manhattan. And one day, got to the point where I recognized that I was making really significant contributions to the organization, but as the old saying goes, I didn't think my paycheck matched that. And at the same time, I had a really good friend who was the person who actually introduced me to Lee Hecht Harrison because he was their top salesperson, and he was an African American like me, and so he was reaching the same point that that he was their worldwide top salesperson, and he thought his paycheck didn't actually reflect that either. So I was their principal content and delivery person. I actually would be on CNN and Bloomberg and other public facing programs representing the knowledge base of what was going on in the job market and so forth. So he and I sat down and said, like, well, why don't we do this for ourselves? Why don't we stop this process? Because we are the top in our field. We know how to do this business. We know how to sell to the customers and how to deliver. And so in 2010, we decided that we would launch out and build on the strength of not having the bureaucracy around us that would keep us from being able to respond more quickly. And at the same time that, we were able to capitalize on the experience that we had. We didn't have to, like I say, it was nothing against them. It was just that it was the right time for us. And so we've been able to maintain some very good relationships with them, but we're very proud of the fact that this past fall, we actually went up for a major contract against them and the company decided to split it, and so we got a part of it, and they got a part of it. So so as I said, all's well that ends well.
Mhm. And I guess what I took from your response just now was kind of about salary, or not just about salary, but I guess my question leading to that is, I guess, how to negotiate your value, I think would be the right way to phrase that. Of like when you're talking with the employer, or I guess even changing your career, how do you negotiate your value or negotiate your salary so that long term you feel that your work is being also put in the numbers as well, I guess.
Serena, that is a wonderful question. And so, yeah, so let me make sure that I go back and put some parameters around that. So, one of the things that we talk about is when we talk about compensation rather than just salary, is that compensation is more than just salary. So, as you heard me say, one of the things that factored into it was I wasn't happy with that commute. You know, I had a at the time a young daughter who was growing up, and my commute into New York from central New Jersey was 2 hours each way. And so literally I was leaving home before she was up, and when I got home, she was asleep. And so having done that commute for 10 years, that was a big factor in my saying to myself, it's just not worth it to keep this part of my life on hold, if you will. And so my partner, who was looking at the same kind of changeover, we both decided that it was a big part of what we considered our compensation. That, you know, no matter how much money we were getting, it did not match what we were having to give up. And so when you start thinking about how you're going to be compensated in the market, you really do need to not let it be solely about money. And, you know, and of course that depends on what field you're in, because, you know, I've got a lot of Wall Street friends who would beg to differ. You know, it's always about the money. But for the majority of us, you know, we also think about things like quality time. We think about things like balance. We think about things like education values. You know, are you going to go back and get your advanced degrees, or do you have to get further certifications? And so all of those things factor into how you understand what your value in the market is. And that means that the prospective employers that you're going to be speaking with, you want to have already done your homework to understand what is necessary for you to continue to enhance your career. So when I talk about licensing and further degrees, sometimes those are prerequisites for being able to advance your career. And so if you're working for a company where the salary might not be quite as good, but they're going to pay for your licensing or your education, then you've got to factor that in as well. So when you're looking at the market, you want to really understand what they're buying, but also what they're doing to support. But you always start with yourself as the individual, because, you know, we have a little fun saying. People say there's no I in team. We say there's not one in unemployment either. So so you want to make sure that you've got a good commitment to your own values and to what's important to you, so that you can then negotiate from a position of strength.
Right. That totally makes sense. Okay, great. Because I was like, did I ask that question properly? Yes. Okay. I guess my next question then is about work-life balance. I think kind of young people of our generation, and probably of your generation as well, kind of have the ideology that the corporate world wasn't built to have a work-life balance. So I guess my question is, do you see that there is a work-life balance, or do you recommend something that would have interns change their mindset about the way that they view the corporate world?
And another great question, and I think it's one that is more age specific.
Mm.
Because what we find out is early on, when you're young and you have lots of energy and you're less encumbered, you have more of an opportunity to tie yourself into extra hours to make your way in your chosen profession. And then, as you said, as you mature, you get to a point where you start to evaluate and understand what's really important to you. And so, and that continues to evolve over the course of life. You know, like I said, we can certainly attest to that. And so, what it means, though, early on, is that you always need to make time for the things that are important to you, that keep your energy level up. You know, one of the things that I've seen, even with those folks who work on Wall Street, you know, they get to a place very quickly where they recognize that they're on the fringes of burnout,
Mm.
because they've been so concerned about making that bonus and advancing their careers that when it comes time for family gatherings, when it comes time for the things that they cannot replace or that they can't make up, they find themselves, almost in a state of depression because they really haven't in allowed themselves to enjoy the fruits of their labor. And so a number of their colleagues who have gone through the process have helped them to see a little bit of why they need to have that balance earlier in life, because some of them have gotten to that point where, yes, they made the money they needed to do and they reached their 40s and they're ready to retire, but they're fried. And so, they're suffering everything from health issues to emotional problems. And so, what's the old saying? What good is it to gain the whole world and not be able to enjoy it and have access to what you're working for? And so, I would highly encourage the young people here to think about a balance that allows you to enjoy the time that you're spending. Just as when you're in college, we say, it's not all about the grades. I'm sure that's a surprise to some of you, but but I'm sure you recognize that there comes a point where you just need to understand that you need to enjoy your college experience as well.
And that brings me to my next question of who has been your greatest mentor, whether it's in college, your home life, or just in the current changes in your career?
And I love thinking about that because I've had so many, and it started young. As I said, my father was easily my first mentor from a professional side, but you heard me mention my mother. My mother was the academic enforcer in the process, making sure and so I cannot undersell how she imprinted upon myself and my siblings the need to excel, the need to dispel the stereotypes that were going to come. And so just those conversations with her were all about understanding how to emphasize the need to learn. And so it wasn't so much about academics, but she really impressed upon us the need to learn. And my father co-signed that in that, he was more of the person who mentored through telling stories about his upbringing and the things that he learned along the way. And then I lived in a neighborhood where there were a lot of old people, and that was a kind of an interesting environment as well. Because living in that neighborhood, I learned something early about respecting those folks. And I'll tell you just a little short little anecdote is that, one of the things that you never wanted to do was disobey your parents. And so one day my mother sent me to the store when I was about 12 years old, and there was a little store in the neighborhood. And she told me to get something because she was making dinner. And as I'm trying to get to the store, there were these three old men who lived in these three houses between me and the store. And each one of them stopped me. And they stopped me and they talked. And I'd already been taught you respect your elders, so I just had to stand there and absorb these stories. And so I ended up an hour later getting back, and I knew my mother was just going to be just beside herself. And so I'm going in ready to face the music. And so she said, "What happened?" And I said, "Well, Mr. Ben stopped me." And so once I said that, she was like, "Well, okay, all right." And so that taught me something about those. And I said, "Wait a minute, there must be something more." Because I'll confess, those conversations, I wasn't listening a whole lot because I was more concerned about I'm going to be late getting back in there. But that taught me a valuable. I said, there's something my mother, you know, somehow she placed a lot of value on what those older guys were saying. And so maybe I need to be listening to what they were imparting. And so I cannot tell you the value that I have placed on those conversations over the years that have really helped form and shape the person that I am. And I've had plenty of professional mentors as well. But I would dare say the information that, of course, I got from my parents and grandparents, but then those three men who gave me a sense of wisdom at that young age, I could not put a price on that.
Right. And I would encourage interns to start putting questions in the chat, as well as starting to think of some questions as we begin to get to the more conversational part of the speaker series. And I guess my next leading question would be, how has your measure of success changed as your career has changed or you have gained more experience?
Hmm. Well, and again, you get to a point, and I know it's probably awfully difficult for young people to see because of the world in which you're growing up in, is that, there's a lot of materialism, there's a lot of reputationalism, there's a lot of socialism that goes in there. And so it's a balancing act. And so the how my perspectives on success have changed over the years is that I've learned that it's more important, and this is something that I think I've taken from your generation and some of the generations in between, is that you've placed much more of a premium on satisfaction, on, self-satisfaction, and that you've determined that, a job, if it's not giving you that sense of self-satisfaction, then there's another job. It's just not worth it. And so that's a lesson that I think our generation had to take from your generations and the generations in between, because we were locked into the time of, find a job, continue to work with that company, and literally look for an opportunity to retire there. Forget about the idea of the grass being greener on the other side and all that stuff. Bird in the hand is worth two in the bush. All that stuff we were oriented into, and we sacrificed a lot. And so it's created a lot of problems along the way in terms of interpersonal relationships, even inside families. And so if I have adapted, it's because of the lessons that I've learned from the Generation X and the Millennials and Generation Y, is that, there are more important things than money. There are more important things than materialism. And that if you get all those things and you're still not satisfied with who you are as a person, then you really haven't gotten to what you need to.
Right. And I think success looks different for so many different people, but I always think that the main thing is knowing that you're going to be able to live a long, healthy life. I think that having a job that satisfies you or having a job that you know you can pivot from or change from, I think can be a great definition of success as long as you're well enough to be able to continue to do what you're passionate about.
Well said.
Any questions? Any comments?
So,
And I,
Sarima, I have a question, and only because I know a tiny bit about it since I've known Rod for a few years now, but I don't know how it works. So I typed in a comment. I'll just go from here. You can ignore the comment, in other words. But Rod, I know something, and I'm fascinated by this, but I don't know what it involves. Your firm, Best Talent Management, does name, image, likeness consulting. Can you talk, what is that, first of all? A lot of people hear about it, but don't really necessarily know what that does and or what it is. And then how does your firm help people with that?
Thanks, Andrew. Yeah, it's a very new, exciting part of the branding and marketing process for athletes and entertainers. But particularly, we emphasize the part around the athletes because, I mean, entertainers forever have had control of their name, image, and likeness, which says that in essence, you have the ability to sell your name, sell your image, sell your likeness for promotions, for endorsements, and things like that. But high school and college athletes never had that because the colleges and the high schools maintain that control. So, and particularly in colleges, it's a very new phenomenon for high schoolers, but because high schools really didn't do a whole lot with the name, image, and likeness of their athletes, but colleges in particular were literally taking full advantage of the fact that these athletes who were selling millions of dollars of tickets and jerseys and other kinds of assorted memorabilia and billions of dollars of television contracts were not getting any kind of compensation. The old adage was people would say, oh, they're getting a free education. Well, as one who went through that process, I can tell you there's no such thing as a free education because we were literally working for it. And if anybody had any doubt, as we say, let us miss some classes or miss some practices, and you'd find out just how quickly that free education could disappear. And so, but the unfortunate reality was that we had no way to share in the fruits of our labors, and it really was labors. And so a suit was filed a few years ago by a basketball player by the name of Eddie House, and before that by a UCLA player whose name escapes me. But they were really attempting to unionize at Northwestern University and say, look, this is patently unfair. This is one of the worst monopolies, and it borders on an enslavement process where people are continuously coming through this process, and the people who are benefiting the most, coaches were being paid in the millions of dollars a year, and us as athletes saying, well, who pays to see the coach? We knew that that wasn't a part of the process. And so the Supreme Court finally decided in favor. Well, first, the NCAA recognized that they didn't have any legal ground to stand on with the NIL. So they allowed the players to maintain their own name. And just to give you another little quick anecdote of how awful it was, there was a University of Minnesota wrestler who decided that he would just do a little rap record, and he put it out on iTunes, and he lost his scholarship because he used his own name to market his little rap record. And so that's the kind of control they were having over these individuals. There was an Ohio State football player who was the quarterback who sold his college championship ring and jersey to buy Christmas presents for his family. He lost his scholarship. So in other words, he was told that he didn't even own the spoils that he had been given from that. And so that was the kind of unfairness that was going on. And so once they took it to court, the NCAA folded very quickly and decided they needed to make a settlement. But beyond that, more recently, the Supreme Court weighed in and said that colleges can actually pay their athletes. So that's a very new development. And so it has changed the game entirely. You've seen a number of coaches who used to be the primary beneficiaries have gotten out of the sport because, they're just so distraught about the ideas that athletes would have the opportunity to benefit from their own labors. But what we do, Andrew, as a part of that process is that we work with these young athletes in high school to help them to understand how to set up the opportunities to market their own names and likeness and images. So you'll see that sometimes, it's not all the glamour of TV commercials and things like that, even though they're some of the more famous ones, we'll get that. But there are opportunities for young people to just be paid to show up at like car dealership openings or at some other business opening. They get paid appearance fees to go to golf tournaments and things like that because these events like to have people that they can market their event around. And so some of them are as a student up that they want to actually chronicle and write books or articles about their experiences. So some of them are embarking upon podcasts or blogs that they can be monetized as well. So it's really what we do with them is we, one, start to understand what their value and market potential is, and then we help them to set forth a plan for how they can actually benefit from it. So as I said, it's a brand new part of the equation, but we love it because it just now gives the athletes themselves an opportunity to really take advantage of the time and energy they've spent in developing their skills. Before, it used to be so one-sided, and now it really is opening up. Still hasn't been fully fleshed out. That's why you're hearing a lot about it, that there's some inequities based on which sport you play and so forth. But at the end of the day, the biggest takeaway is that the colleges now can actually pay the athletes. A lot of them were doing it before, but if anybody found out, that meant they lost their scholarships and the colleges could be punished. But that's no longer a part of the equation.
Thank you.
Mhm. I had no idea it was that extensive because I know at Emory we have people who have gone to the Olympics. I know that they constantly are working with like our marketing and communications majors to build their brands or, do various things to give back to their community as well as other athletes. So I had no idea it was that extensive. So that was great to learn about.
Okay.
Anybody else? Any other questions, comments?
Rod, I have a question. Many of our students, many of our interns are working with either supervisors or hosts that are serving in the role of their mentors. And you've mentioned that throughout your conversation about how important the people around you were. What's some suggestions or advice in your experience over the years that you can give to our interns on how to build that network if it's not intentionally in front of you, right? Because we often know it's not something that they're often comfortable with doing, right? Just because you haven't done it. So, what's some takeaways from your experience that you can share with the group as well?
Thank you. That's a wonderful question. And so, one of the things that we often emphasize is the fact that we're always networking. We just don't always call it that. We'll call it socializing, we'll call it just chopping it up, things like that. But the bottom line is, we try to take the academic sting out of the term networking, because unfortunately, too many people see networking as what's that old academic description, a freestanding web of participants with shared interest in common, blah, blah, blah. And so, we throw that out the window, because the truth of the matter is, we say that anytime you have a conversation with anyone in which you take away useful information, you've networked. So the difference is, when you're talking about your career and so forth, that you're still networking. You just have an idea that you want to pursue something related to your career, as opposed to how we've networked. I'm sure everybody here has at some point or another realized when you've gotten offered something like tickets or a book or something like that, or that just you seemingly came out of the blue, and you recognize, well, no, it really wasn't out of the blue. It's because you'd had a conversation at some point where they would acknowledge that that's something that you would be interested in. And so, how you go about fostering that with your mentors, and how you go about fostering that with the people in your network, is just to have specific conversations. So if you're talking to your mentor, one of the best questions you can ask them is just an open-ended question, such as, how did you get started in your career? Another great question is, if you had it to do over again, what would you do differently? Another question is, what are your plans going forward? And so, once you get the conversation flowing, there's what we call the eureka moment, that says that somewhere in that conversation, you're not only going to hear something that you say, aha, or that there's something that you go, well, I really hadn't thought about that. And those are the kinds of conversations that you want to have, which are followed by, at some point, saying, well, you know what, if I wanted to learn a little bit more about that, who would you suggest that I talk to? So you're always looking for the next connection. So that's really how you build your network. And then I hope, and I'm certain all of you are on LinkedIn, because you absolutely need to be there. That is the professional standard, the platinum standard for professional networking. And so, using your LinkedIn network, once you connect to each other and connect to those mentors and people that you're going to interact with, you'll expand your network exponentially. And as you do that, you start to hear about companies, and you should go to LinkedIn regularly and click on, or put into the search bar, some of those companies that you see in the news, or that you've heard about, or that you might have a passing knowledge of, to see who's in your network who has a connection. And so, let your curiosity run wild. That's the best thing that you have at this point, is that people will acknowledge that and appreciate the fact that you're interested in not only what they do, but what their company does, or that you have this curious streak that says they're willing to impart knowledge to you. So if there really is a key to building your network, it's just to be curious and ask questions. Think
I
as
think,
else had a question?
yes, Ethan had a question.
Go ahead, Ethan.
Hello, can y'all hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you for everything thus far. I just had a question, because you're like a career coach, and I was hoping in the future to work internationally. I don't know if you've worked with someone who's tried to make that pivot to work internationally, and I just wanted to get into your methodology, and how do you typically approach someone who's trying to go down that career path?
Great question, Ethan. And the good news for you is that the methodology is the same. We've worked not only with people who are looking to work internationally, but we've worked with people who are internationally and looking to work domestically. So the process, again, is always about having these conversations with people who can make the kinds of decisions that can lead you to the opportunity. And so what I would share with you is that if you're starting along that process, then not only do you want to talk to people who have international connections, but you want to explore even with those who you may not think of. If your colleges have international connections. And so hopefully you've shared that objective and goal with like your career services offices. If you've shared that goal with some of your professors, and because I guarantee you, if they're teaching in those areas, and even if they're not, they have connections with people and organizations that work both internationally as well as domestically. So if you do nothing else, make sure that you just, again, let your curiosity run wild with those people in terms of just asking that question. Like, if you were me and you wanted to work internationally, where would you start? And you'll be surprised at how that kind of open-ended question will give you a wealth of information, and how receptive some of those folks will really be to have that conversation with you, because they hadn't necessarily thought about it, and they'll appreciate that you gave them that opportunity. The great thing about your place and time in this is that those of us who are more seasoned, if you will, so I'm using that for Carolyn and Andrew so that we can acknowledge that we appreciate the opportunity to give back. And so I guarantee you, when you're starting to talk to those folks who are like us, more seasoned, we appreciate the idea of sharing the benefit of our experience with you, because we want you to move forward as wisely and without as many blips as possible. We know that, hey, each and every one of us is going to make our share of missteps along the way. That's part of growing and learning, but you don't have to make them all. And that's why we're here. We're able to be the kinds of people that say, if you talk to us, we can give you some heads up about, okay, this is what you might want to be aware of as you head down that path. And sometimes that kind of a little heads up can be the kind of information that keeps you from wasting some time. It's not like, all time is good time, but you don't want to spend 3 or 4 years working towards something that you ultimately realize that you really don't have the passion for, that it wasn't what you thought it was. And again, happens anyhow, but it doesn't have to happen if you utilize your network and have conversations.
Mhm. Any other final questions? Questions, comments? Well, thank you so much. I just want to say that all of your answers, of course, were phenomenal, very insightful. And I hope that I asked questions that the interns found valuable, that you found valuable, and that the work that your agency is doing, I think, is like just so extensive from what I read online, looked on LinkedIn. So like you said, that curiosity, doing that research, making a connection by being interested in the person that you're having a conversation with. So thank you very much.
Well, I have thoroughly enjoyed it. This is one of the best interviews I've ever been a part of. And Sarima, you're tremendous. And I would encourage each and every one of you to find me on LinkedIn and connect. As you said, Ethan, if that's what your desire is, you will find that there are folks in my portfolio of connections who could be people who could be very instrumental to your journey there. And so for the rest of you who are still figuring it out, and even if you already know, as I said, be sure that I find out that I've got these connection requests that I'm going to graciously accept and make myself available to you for any way that I can help as you process along your career journey.
One last thing. Thank you, Rod, so much for that. It's a tremendous offer. And I know you have, is it a Monday ministry where you and some colleagues have drop-ins? Do you mind sharing that information as well?
Sure, sure. So out of, as I mentioned earlier about the give back, like say at Fountain Baptist Church, we have something called the networking ministry. And so it is just hosted by me as a member of, because we started at Fountain, but we have people across the country. We have people, certainly people who are non-members, as well as coaches who are not Fountain members. And it's available to help you to flesh out your network. And what we do is we offer in a sort of a 360 approach of helping young people and people who are throughout their career journey. So in essence, we work with people who have just started out to people who are re-entering the workforce after having retired. And so again, the good news is that the process is the same for everyone, but it does take some application based on where you are along your journey. We've got some folks who have come to us and said, listen, I've got a couple of job offers and I need to have some negotiating practice. We've got others who say, I've got an interview coming up. Others who say, I'm not good at this networking thing and I really want to know how. So others who say, well, I'm trying to develop my resume. And so we call the thing a marketing brochure because we want you to have the right frame of mind that says this document is about how you sell your skills and qualifications as opposed to the word resume, which means kind of obituary in French. So we want to take you down through that process, but you're all invited. I will share the link with Andrew and with Carolyn so that they can provide it for you. But we meet every Monday at 10 a.m. virtually. And we have a 2-hour meeting there, myself, and we've got 5 other coaches who are there. We have people just check in and share what their challenges are. Because again, there are 3 states that we see people with. The people got unemployed, people who are underemployed, and then a term we use called misemployed, meaning people who are working in the wrong field or needed some help with navigating their career. But you're all welcome to come and partake in the process, even if you just want to come and observe and see how it works so that you can get some networking tips. You're all welcome to come in and we'd be happy to have you.
Thank you for that.
Thank you.
So I believe I will be seeing some of you on Friday, like I say, where we'll get into a little more in-depth part of this networking plan, do some practical applications. So I look forward to seeing you there. And if I don't see you again, I've really appreciated this opportunity to share informationally. And as we say, best wishes for your career success going forward.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Rod. Thanks, Sarima. Excellent job once again. And Rod, we're looking forward to seeing you on Friday.
All righty.
Bye,
Thank you
everyone.
so
Stay
much.
well.
Hi, everyone.
Thank
Well.
you.
Thank you.